Hi folks, Mr. Long here. I'm going to do a quick screencast on simplifying radicals. And specifically, these are the types of equations that you would end up getting if you're using the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic equation, or you could get something like this too when you're completing the square. So what we want to do is simplify this as far as we can, and really what that means is separating out the parts on the terms on either side of the plus and minus. That's one part of it. The other piece that you need to worry about is getting this to its simplest form, so turning it into a mixed radical, if possible. And in this case, it will be possible. So here we go. So the first thing I'm going to look at, remember that we're evaluating and simplifying. That's what this is. And when you're evaluating and simplifying, you do brackets first. Well, even though there's not brackets here, in fact, a square root is a grouping symbol, so we need to do that first. So just off to the right, I'm going to write 128, and I'm going to think, do I have any of these square numbers as factors of 128? And I would just use my calculator and do 128 divided by 4, and that works out into a whole number. 128 divided by 9, well, that's not a whole number. 128 divided by 16, I believe that works. But if I keep going through, there's a really kind of an obvious one here. 64. 64 is an obvious one because 64 here is an obvious one because this is 128. And 64 times 2 is 128. 6 times 2 is 12. 4 times 2 is 8. So I know that 64 is a common factor. So I know that 128 equals 64 times by 2. Okay, in other words, the root of 128 equals root of 64 times 2, which equals 8 root 2. Okay, so I can now replace root 128. I can replace that with that. Okay, so here we go. Let's go to our next step then when we do that. So this now equals negative 20 plus or minus 8 root 2. And then each of those are divided by 4. And let's see if we have any simplification we can do here. Well, on this one here, 4 goes into 20 5 times. That's a 5. And then we have 4 goes into 8 2 times. So we're going to have plus or minus 2, and I still have root 2. Okay, and so those are your those could be your two x-intercepts. So in other words, z1 would equal 5 minus 2 root 2, and z2, the second one, would be 5 plus 2 root 2. Okay, folks, so that's your process. So what you always want to do is to simplify this first. Okay, get that in as simplest form as you can by factoring out the largest square. Okay, and by the way, when you do that, you might not know if you've got the largest square, right? So you always look at this extra number that you've got here and see, is there a factor of that square, right? I picked 64. If I picked 16, for example, if I would have picked 16 there, I would have ended up with, that would have been 8. And then 8 has a factor of 4 in it, which then I would be required to do it all over again, okay? So again, that's the process for evaluating and simplifying these. Hopefully that helps you as you go through this process.